Hello once again everyone, and welcome back to the Zettel, and joining me once again is Eric, as they were going to start into the Nachreisen section. This one's got a lot to talk about, so I'm probably going to do this in two videos. This first one we're just going to talk about the first kind of the basic concept, main actions you can do from, because this first and second kind of blend together very well. So, firstly, what is Nachreisen? Nachreisen is the idea of chasing after. It's going to seem a lot like Ansetzen, which we covered last time, which is a reminder. Ansetzen was the idea of I'm already in a loaded position. He pulls back, I go into the gap. I follow his motion of preparation so that I thrust into him before he can execute a cut or thrust back at me. And in particular, the places you really want to be putting these is when either you're relatively at the edge of distance and he's pulling back to load, or, especially if we were just in the midst of something and he feels like he needs to charge back against something, is a time to follow forward. So, Nachreisen is kind of that, but on the other side of his attack. The best example in our first play is going to be the idea of I put my left foot forward and hold myself in the guard with one pog. The more open I am, the better. They do describe arms stretched out above the head. You can pull it off the shoulder. I do recommend being here. Here, Eric might just try to take his left to try and cut, especially my lead forearm. So if you're staying in more of a narrow one, that's a pretty appealing target. A lot of people will try to go for that. And we'll talk about other applications in a second. But my goal is to make sure he doesn't hit me. I can achieve this in a couple ways. I can do a small retreat. I could just know my distance and Eric doesn't know his distance. That's nice, right? This in particular is nice if maybe we were just in something and I pull back and he tries to nip things, but he misjudged his range. That happens more than any of us would like to care to admit. Or the third option is we're going to do a little changing step, and that's my favorite. But first, we'll just do a quick retreat. So, we're into the edge of distance, and I go in the Bontag, he goes to cut me, retreat, fire that sword out as soon as possible. For those of you that have been following along with for us for a while, this should look a lot like the way I like to set up my Scheitelhau, and this is why, because it puts him down all. So, since we've already covered that, and that's relatively self-explanatory, let's look at the changing step. So changing step or V step is where I pull my lead foot back, and then I put my foot back into the hole, my right foot back in the hole. You could also do this as just a quick slip, but since I'm going to be cutting from my right anyway, let's go ahead and put that foot in there. Now you can do this in a two-tempo timing, which would be 1, 2, which is nice, especially if then you're worried about him parrying or what have you. Or, for those of you that also like the back sorters, this is a great time to see if you can essentially slip, where he cuts, 1. That sword's a lot faster about going out there. I find when I do this with a long sword, it ends up more as a thrust than a cut most times, but it's the same exact idea. I did this once to someone and they described it like I use a Dark Souls iframe. But the main easy way to remember it though is to just keep it to a nice simple retreat, because especially if you're good at moving around your guards, that can load you up very well and you can explode off of that a little bit better. It just is a bit quicker to do. The only thing you've got to be cautious about is, let's say Eric realizes what I'm doing and does a half cut. Make sure that you still are loaded enough that you will bind instead of jump forward into a tip. Same of any time you blade. Watch out for half cuts. Make sure it's last second. Capitalize on it as soon as you can. Okay. All that out of the way, that's the basic concept of a Nachreisen. You let the tip go past you. You fill the gap on this side rather than the Ansetzen, where we let the tip leave us, and we followed into there. Now, let's also talk about tertiary targets. At the moment, I've been having Eric go for my forearm, which makes it very easy for me to dodge by doing a relatively small dodge. If he's going for deeper on my body, then of course, I may need to do more of a void, but the benefit of him going deeper is that then he is deeper. So I find it's almost easier to hit people. Harder to dodge, easier to hit people when they're going for deep target. This concept can also be extremely useful against people who like to try and hit you with the Geiselin. In particular, that changing step, whoop. But now rather than exploding immediately into the cut, because I'm not saying I can't do it, but we'll go through a really slow motion, that requires me to slip my leg and spring into this gap before he's back ready to do anything. And I also find that people have the potential to just Mittelhau, and don't get me wrong, I'll cut Eric down the forehead, but I don't want to take another cross guard to the ribs in my lifetime. I don't find it worth doing in our modern context. Life or death, I can live with that. But what I like to do with that instead then is if I see someone's going to Geiselin, I slip and I use the Nachreisen to go into a point forward guard. If I get there before they're loaded, I can follow it up with a thrust. If I get there as they load, then I can wait for them to try and cut at me or my blade and do the next appropriate action from there. So, Nice and simple, that's Nachreisen. Let's now talk about its first name play, the Aussere Mynn. So, Aussere Mynn means outer taking, and I'm just going to go ahead and say it now, kind of in the Dupleren family. I say that only because it'll get you thinking in the right manner. Don't think of this as exclusively a Dupleren though. Different setup. Essentially, the idea for any Aussere Mynn, and this is an example, you could do this in a bunch of different places. For example, von Bauman's spec book has one that looks very different to this. But essentially all that happens is I set it up exactly like we just did. Eric cuts for me, I void, which puts him down into Alder. I cut at his head. Now there's a couple different things he can try to do. He can try and bring his false edge up to beat me, but in this particular timing, he's always going to be too slow. He could try and bring his sword up to his right side and attempt to bogey. That's your left, you're right. Yeah, so if you try to bogey that way, I'm going to hit your hands. Try to bogey the right is the best option, but that also means a 2-time action and gives me a lot of opportunity to do evil things. The best option, especially since your tip is still heavy, is to haul up with your left hand. In the midst of a cut, when I cut, if I realize something's going wrong, I can always just rip up with my left hand. Cut, no! And that, because of the properties of tips going with the right, left pulls up, my strong gets between me and his sword as soon as possible. This is into a deeper thing I'm going to talk about at the end. But essentially, it's his fastest way to make a good displacement, a good cover that puts his tip forward. Eric is not doing bad things right now. So, we look at that situation. Eric cuts for me, I void. I throw my cut in the midst of that, and we end up in a bind. Now, keep that still for the moment. We're going to talk about that. Let's do that again. He cuts, whoop, hey, and we end up in a good bind. And this is good for me. I'm on top of his sword. We have a million different devices to do from here. I can whine. If I got low enough, I can just push where it is. Lots of great stuff. However, and also, Eric can't currently up me. If he tries to, I will always be on him first, and he knows it, because he's in a recessed guard. So what is Eric to do? Well, first we're going to look at what I can do. My first option would be just to turn and thrust. And that's one we see again and again and again and again. He's in Ox, so I go to Ox, and we get this lovely X stabbing that looks fantastic on the cover of the book. He knows that's a thing. If he tries to lift with his tip, which Eric did unintentionally at the very beginning, people realize what's going to happen, so they start lifting a tip. If he lifts it just where it is, I'm going to cut my Zwerk, because this is essentially a Zwerk for the Aussere Mynn, on a flatter line, almost like a Crumpfile. So first, don't move so I can show that motion. So, he cuts, I cut, boom, okay? What I'm going to do is I'm going to throw a Zwerk as I throw my body forward, here. It's along his sword, but it's just a quick little schnit. Now the thing is, even though I'm getting close to his tip, I'm in no danger here because the pressure on my sword never went away. If Eric tries to sense that or work with that, he doesn't get enough read to know where to push forward, especially if he's already in the midst of pushing up, which is what we'll do now. Now by up as well, I'm talking about getting your tip straight, not raising up to the sky. That's a different thing. So we go there. Up, hey, oh cool. That even makes it easier because now his tip is up in the sky and I have nothing to fear. You can kind of think of this as a bit like firing a Crumpfile, but instead of stepping crookedly, I'm stepping orthodox, making it a Zwerk. We'll do that one more time, shall we? Cut, whoop, hey, just like that. And again, this is no danger for me. Eric can't do anything with it, and since I put my left foot forward, I'm too close for him to do anything. After I land, I don't want to stay here though, because I've given him a good crack on the ear, but Eric's probably still in this fight. Your job is then to double out to his left side. The easiest way to do this is to pull on that pommel, get another shot to the top of his head, or crack his arms with another Zwerk, or even you could go in and slice and do fun things like that. So, once more, this time I'll finish it off. Void, up, hey, up. Nice and straightforward. And you'll kind of see a version of that play out in a lot of tournaments when people start doing the Zwerk counter. Okay, so that's great. What if instead he raises his tip skyward? And you see this in some depictions. So what that would mean is, we'll have you behind a mirror. If I realize that someone's going to possibly wind into this hole, if I just lift, he can zook in, he can do a bunch of things, he can do the Aussere Mynn like we talked about before. So instead, I try to essentially throw his point away by doing this. And what I'm seeking to do is I'm not trying to just whee, right? That's a different thing. What I'm trying to do is get back essentially into the scales from where then I can maybe get a thrust, or he will have to fall back, or what have you. So it's going skyward, but it's not expelling. If you catch someone who's trying to expel, just wait and cut them. So, that having been said, let's look at what we do from there. It's the same technique, but looks a little different. Eric cuts at me, whoop, hey, he starts to go skyward. Yep, nope, you're fine. I do the exact same step, just now I end up behind his blade. And this one is even safer than the one before, because of course now he's way up in the sky. He can, I guess, bonk me if he wants, but otherwise I'm pretty good against anything he wants to do. After you've gotten this hit, the easiest thing to do is just keep striding in the hole, and you can double out while passing through him with that nice cross step start. So, here's that again. Boy, cool. And that time I got a stick, so I'm just going to go ahead and keep slicing. If at any point during this he does manage to get your tip in a place where you cannot throw your Aussere Mynn, he'll try to cut around or he'll try to seek with the point. No big deal. Let him do so and follow where he goes. This is another idea of both Ansätze and Nachreisen goodness. So, let's go for the first one, for example. He cuts, I avoid, okay. He lifts his tip enough that he feels safe trying to throw a cut wherever he wants, right? No big deal. Ansätze. I followed with a counter to an up man. Alternatively, we're here. He decides that he's going to try and do a thrust or things along those lines. Follow with him. That's the other cool thing about Nachreisen. It's not just he attacks me, I avoid, I hit him, right? It's also the idea of letting yourself pursue. And the best way I can illustrate this is a lot like this. Eric is going to step to the left. I could step against him, and that knocks him out. The way I do that is just by feeling where he goes and letting myself go with him in a favorable way. Alternatively, I could Nachreisen him in a different way. He goes step to the left, I go to step in. That's essentially all I'm doing with the sword in this instance, especially anytime you're in a windy-bindy fight. When Eric goes to thrust at me, I shouldn't go ahead and throw if you want. I shouldn't be like, ah, right? I mean, you can, but that's not a good idea. Instead, you should just let yourself relax and go with him. By calmly following where he goes, no matter where he goes, in any of our 24 Winden, you're going to find the opportunity to get them offline and get yourself back online. And a lot of this then transfers into the whole idea of fight from your Hangen. It's going to end up going there again and again and again. So, one final time, we'll do the tip up in the air. He cuts for me, boy, cut, tip up in the air, whack, and then I can do whatever I want. So, thank you very much, Eric. And thank you all very much for watching. We're not done with Nachreisen. We also have the entrance from low, and to talk about some things down there, but I'm going to save that for next time, because this is already plenty long. So, thank you all very, very much for watching. We will go over some other techniques another time.